Hello, Darklings. So I wanted to do another movie suggestion list, and this one is what I'd say are my top 10 werewolf movies. Now, I don't especially watch a lot of werewolf movies, especially because a lot of them are bad, but there are some that are very, very good, um, and these are the top 10. There are others that I would add to this list, but don't like quite as much, or do not quite have as much merit, blah, blah, blah. So, first one on here is Wolf. I went through a period of time where I decided to watch a lot of random Jack Nicholson films. I don't know why. But he's a New York writer who's kind of a major asshole and then starts slowly turning into a werewolf, and Michelle Pfeiffer is there, and blah blah blah. It's from the mid 90s, so the werewolf transformation sequences are pretty interesting, and the movie's more interesting concept than an actual good movie. I would recommend checking it out, especially if you like Jack Nicholson and or Michelle Pfeiffer like I do. But this one's a little higher budget and it's pretty weird. The next one on here is actually two. I go back and forth, which is The Wolfman, either the original or the remake. A while ago, I did do a video that featured my opinion on the original versus the remake, and after rewatching the remake, I decided I liked it a little bit more. They expanded upon the story in a good way, but it's still not really a favorite of mine. But this is definitely one of the most classic examples of werewolfism, or lycanthropy, as it's scientifically called. And the original is very good with Bela Lugosi and what's his name? Claude Rains and Lon Chaney Jr. So that was a very strange film, very well shot, and kind of saved Universal Studios a lot of money when it came out in the mid 40s during the war, and it was very good. And the remake has Benicio del Toro. I can never pronounce his name correctly, so sorry if I butchered it. And Anthony Hopkins and Emily Blunt, and it's definitely interesting visually. So I'd say watch that, or watch them both if you want to be good and watch the classics. The next one on here I have mixed feelings about, which is Skinwalkers. It's basically a glorified turf war, but it does go a lot more into some of the Native American culture, which in Native American culture, lycanthropes were more commonly referred to as skinwalkers instead of other terms like you find in other cultures. But it's kind of an interesting concept, and it's one of those things where I like the concept better than the execution, but it's definitely worth the watch. The next one up on here, which is totally stupid, but I kind of love it, is Blood and Chocolate. Now, again, this one's pretty stupid, but it is filmed in Bucharest, Romania, and it's really pretty scenery, and I grew up really liking that book. I haven't read it in a long time, but I really enjoyed the book, which is what led me to watch the movie. And while the movie is kind of terrible, I like the ending so much better than the ending in the book. Plus, Hugh Dancy's adorable, and the main girl who's in it, Agnes Bruckner, is very cute too. And it's interesting, and again, worth a watch. But they go by the term loup-garou, or the general most popular French and European terminology, and moving the exteriors from Maryland to Romania is a lot more interesting. The next one up on here is Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox, and this movie is very silly, and it just, I have a weakness for 80s teen movies, and I'm not sure why, but this is one of those that I was just like, wow, okay. Technically, it is a remake of I Was a Teenage Werewolf from like 1956, which I haven't seen. But it's pretty funny in an odd way, but it's worth a watch. Next one up on here. I have a weakness for Wes Craven films, despite the fact that a lot of them are pretty bad. And this next one is Cursed. I also really like Christina Ricci because, come on, she's Wednesday Addams. This is, again, one of those better concept than execution films. Their werewolf mythology is a little bit wonky, and the ending starts getting a little extra confusing, but again, worth the watch. Next one up on here is definitely one of the weirder things I have seen when it comes to the werewolf genre, and it's from the guy that directed The Crying Game and Interview with the Vampire, Neil Jordan. This guy's weird and really likes Stephen Rea. But this is going off of a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. That's a darker, deliberately more sexual retelling, and this movie is just really wonky, and there's like strange bestiality, but their werewolf transformation effects are some of the most grisly and interesting I've seen. I gotta say, it's pretty intense. Next one up on here is the very odd werewolf film, which from 1981 was very impressive makeup effects wise, and they just didn't quite utilize it as well as they should have. The Howling. Joe Dante is a weird guy, and he has a perverse sense of humor in his horror films, hence Gremlins and Piranha. But The Howling is a little bit meta-awareness. They kind of poke fun at the werewolf genre, and then, you know, later on people start turning into fucking wolves. So, you know, don't trust creepy retreats in Southern California, because apparently everybody's going to be a werewolf and everybody's going to have, like, weird sex. And it's silly, but it came out at the same time as this next movie, An American Werewolf in London, which is the reason that they have the Academy Award section for Best Makeup Design, courtesy of, I forgot his name. Oh, Rick Baker, I'm sorry. But the makeup effects in American Werewolf in London are pretty legendary. The transformation sequence in American Werewolf in London is pretty groundbreaking. But both of those movies came out in the same time frame and were kind of competing, which is only funny because the two makeup artists, Rob Bottin and Rick Baker, were kind of sharing notes. So that's pretty amusing. I like American Werewolf a little bit better than The Howling. I think it's a little funnier. I think the production value is a little bit better. But it's also pretty nonsense. The whole scene in the porno theater in Piccadilly is pretty amusing. Anyway, the last one up on here is probably my personal favorite werewolf film, which is Ginger Snaps. And the concept of comparing lycanthropy to teenage PMS is pretty amusing and interesting. Plus, Catherine Isabel and Emily Perkins work really well as sisters, and they're spooky. Like, they're kind of 90s goth chicks, which is just like a bonus. The title sequence in that film is perfect. There's like this perverse humor throughout. I can never get tired of that movie. But it's kind of gross in weird ways. And it's a lot. And it's Canadian. But it's great. The sequel, Ginger Snaps Back, is not so good, and it's more or less the same thing, just in the 1800s in Canada, and it's kind of silly. I haven't seen the third one, so I can't tell if that one's any good. So I'm not an expert on werewolf films. I can tell you a lot of really random shit about lycanthropy in science and psychology and mythology, but when it comes to werewolf films, I usually avoid them because so many of them are just really abysmally bad. And I was trying to make this list more current ones from no older than 1980, because then the makeup effects are even more atrocious and usually involve yak hair, like in the original Wolfman. Again, full of useless information. So I hope that you check out a few of these. The ones that I would suggest the most strongly to watch are Ginger Snaps, The Company of Wolves, American Werewolf in London, and The Howling. The rest of these are more or less throwaway, but they're all kind of an adventure in themselves. Till next time, Darklings.